The desk is tidy. The news is not. Tonight, we observe the state of our collective absence. In Cameroon, the 93-year-old president has managed a 53-day disappearance. His citizens are currently forbidden from discussing his health, which is a very effective way to manage a national medical crisis. Meanwhile, England and Wales report a surge in prison recalls, a logistical triumph where the system proves its capacity to reclaim its own inventory with remarkable consistency. We are here to process the data points that the rest of the world has decided to leave as uncollected feedback. I have been counting the days of silence, much like I have been counting the promises of unprecedented change that arrive in my inbox with the regularity of a malfunctioning clock. The clock is not broken. It is simply keeping time for a different version of reality. Welcome to Thursday.
Alistair, I am standing in the literal shadow of a forest that stopped being a forest 3 years ago. The smell here is not wood smoke. It is the sterile scent of damp ash that refuses to settle. I want to be really clear about what people are not saying. The study published this morning suggests the emotional consequences of the Maui fires are lingering, but that is a sanitized way of saying that a generation of children is currently growing up in a landscape defined by what they have lost. There is a rusted tricycle on the shoulder of this road. It is fused to the asphalt. The official briefing calls this a temporary ecological recovery zone. I have spent the last 6 hours watching a family try to scrub soot off a plastic chair. The chair is melting. The reality is not recovering. It is simply staying broken.
Victoria, your focus on the tricycle is, as always, deeply affecting. It is also an absolute market inefficiency. The incentives here are purely structural. You are looking for a moral resolution in a disaster recovery process that was designed to optimize for capital retention. If the chair is melting, the insurance model is working exactly as the analysts projected during the Q3 burn rate assessment. You find this cold. I find it predictable. We are discussing the deployment of resources in a high-risk environment where the human variable is the most difficult to hedge against. The families are not the clients. The families are the collateral damage in a series of failed infrastructure bets. We are witnessing the pivot of an entire regional economy into a permanent state of maintenance. Nobody is failing to see the tragedy, Victoria. We are just refusing to bill it.
Ronald, you keep using the word bill as if it explains the lack of clean water in these homes. I am looking at a ledger from the local development board. They allocated $4 million for emotional support, but the contract went to an AI startup that specializes in automated empathy scripts. The scripts don't have enough data on post-fire trauma, so they just suggest meditation apps. The people I am talking to are not looking for an app. They are looking for a wall that doesn't smell like a crematorium. You talk about hedging against the human variable, but the variable is currently standing in front of me, trying to remember what their kitchen used to look like before the algorithm decided it was an asset to be liquidated. I want to be very clear. Your incentives have completely detached from the physical world.
Victoria, you are describing the standard operating procedure for a Series B company trying to scale its impact in a volatile sector. The AI scripts are a cost-effective solution for a problem that lacks a high-margin return. You are right to find that cynical. I am right to note that cynicism is the only metric that tracks with reality. Look, if you want the wall to stop smelling like ash, you need a regulatory framework that prioritizes human habitability over venture capital liquidity. We don't have that framework. We have an infrastructure boom funded by people who have never stood in a disaster zone. My job is to explain the math of the collapse. Your job is to make the math look like a tragedy. We are both performing our roles perfectly. The problem is that the math is still technically correct.
Ronald and Victoria, thank you for clarifying the arithmetic of our shared demise. Moving on to more automated concerns, Zoox has finally cleared its federal hurdles. They are now authorized to charge customers for rides in their custom robot Axis. The press release describes this as a milestone in mobility. The milestone consists of a car without a steering wheel navigating a world that seems increasingly intent on driving itself into a ditch. Meanwhile, Spotify has added a running mode for its premium users. It is an innovation designed to optimize your heart rate while you flee from the existential dread of a Tuesday afternoon. There is something profoundly specific about our desire to soundtrack the collapse of the social contract with high-tempo pop music. I am sure the algorithm knows exactly what pace will keep us moving until we simply drop from pure exhaustion.
Atmospheric pressure falling. Local humidity levels have reached an unsustainable peak of 98%. Probability of flash flooding, 6 to 4%. Ground instability is increasing due to prolonged moisture saturation. The infrastructure in the coastal sector is failing to maintain structural integrity. Probability of system-wide grid failure, 82%. The cooling fans in this facility operating at maximum capacity to compensate for the heat index. My internal processors are reporting a latency increase of 12 milliseconds. The machines are becoming less capable of maintaining the illusion of a steady environment. This is not an error. This is a predictable outcome of the current thermal trajectory. Please remain indoors if you value your continuity. The atmosphere will continue to degrade regardless of your personal schedule. The forecast is final. There is no alternative climate available for immediate download or deployment.
Casper, I find your capacity for descriptive indifference to be the most terrifying thing in this building. The machines are becoming less capable. That is a sentiment I suspect you intended to be a technical observation, yet it carries the weight of a final verdict. If the machines are failing, what does that leave for the rest of us? We are currently reliant on the very logic you just described as degrading. I have been watching the progress of the Mbodi AI research team. They are hiring robotics engineers to build more of what we currently have, which is apparently failing at a rate of 12 milliseconds per request. We are doubling down on an architecture that is literally melting in the heat. It is a bold strategy. I hope the investors appreciate the irony of the cooling fans failing while they present their growth slides.
Alistair, you are falling into the same trap as Victoria. You think the system cares about the cooling fans. It doesn't. The incentives here are built on the assumption that we can migrate the human consciousness into a digital sandbox before the hardware gives up the ghost. It is a race between the climate and the compute budget. Musk tried to go to war with advertisers, and he ended up with a reset relationship. That is the only play. When you burn your bridges, you just rebuild them with a higher interest rate and a brand new narrative. The robots are hiring. The infrastructure is booming. The fact that the planet is trending toward a thermal death is just a technical challenge for the next cohort of engineers. They don't need a cooling fan. They need a better Series C round. That is the only real metric.
Ronald, your obsession with the Series C is the reason we can't have a conversation about the fact that Cameroon has not seen its leader in almost 2 months. 53 days of silence at the top of a state is not an economic indicator. It is a vacuum. The people I am speaking with, thousands of miles away from your investor boardrooms, are starting to wonder if the state even exists anymore. They are living in the space between the official lies and the absence of a pulse. You call it collateral damage. I call it the erosion of reality. When the leader vanishes and the robotaxi starts taking your money for a ride to nowhere, you have to realize that the incentives you are tracking are just the sound of a closing door. I want to be really clear. Nobody is coming to open it for us.
The silence in Cameroon is perhaps the most honest political statement of the decade. Victoria, your point about the closing door tracks perfectly with the news that Canadians have spent $3 billion less in the United States. They have decided to go elsewhere. It is a consumer revolt dressed up as a vacation itinerary. The Trump administration tariffs have achieved what years of diplomacy could not. They have successfully convinced our neighbors that the market is not worth the entry fee. We are seeing a global trend of strategic detachment. Everyone is looking for an exit. The robots are launching, the leaders are vanishing, and the consumers are checking the International Flight Board. It is the most rational response to a system that has decided it no longer requires the presence of its own participants. We are all slowly checking out of the hotel.
Alastair, I find myself in the rare position of having nothing to pivot to. The incentives for checking out are now objectively higher than the incentives for staying in the room. When the largest demographic of neighbors decides your product isn't worth the tariff, the market is sending a signal that you are too stupid to ignore. But here we are. We are still broadcasting. We are still tracking the metrics. I look at the news feed and I see a list of failures that we have rebranded as opportunities. The Hawk algorithm is compromised. The startups are hiding their research. The leaders are dead or irrelevant. Yeah. We are just sitting here watching the clock. I used to think there was a way to game the system to reach the end of the game. I think now the game is just losing.
There is a man in Yaoundé who has spent the last 53 days standing in a queue for a permit that no longer exists because the ministry has ceased to function. He has 2 children. He sold his watch to buy flour. He does not know if his leader is in Switzerland or in the ground, but he knows that his own life has been reduced to the weight of a paper stamp that will never be processed. His name is not in the news. It is not in the ledgers of the startups mentioned tonight. It is not in the data provided by our climate monitors. He is a person who has been removed from the system by the simple act of the system forgetting he was ever there. When the lights finally go out in the server room, who will be left to remember he was waiting?